Beep bappin dip bappin bo 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 bay bo boom dappin boo bop bo bo bop wee wee dappin boo bop
By
bo bo
Courier.
bop.
It was neither the season nor the hour when the park had frequenters, and it is likely that the young lady who was seated on one of the benches at the side of the walk had merely obeyed a sudden impulse to sit for a while and enjoy a foretaste of coming spring. She rested there, pensive and still. A certain melancholy that touched her countenance must have been of recent birth, for it had not yet altered the fine and youthful contours of her cheek, nor subdued the arch, though resolute curve of her lips. A tall young man came striding through the park along the path near which she sat. Behind him tagged a boy carrying a suitcase. At sight of the young lady, the man's face changed to red and back to pale again. He watched her countenance as he drew nearer, with hope and anxiety mingled on his own. He passed within a few yards of her, but he saw no evidence that she was aware of his presence or even existence. Some 50 yards further on, he suddenly stopped and sat on a bench at one side. The boy dropped the suitcase and stared at him with wondering, shrewd eyes. The young man took out his handkerchief and wiped his brow. It was a good handkerchief, a good brow, and the young man was good to look at. He said to the boy, "I want you to take the message to that young lady on that bench. Tell her I am on my way to the station to leave for San Francisco, where I shall join that Alaska moose hunting expedition. Tell her that, since she has commanded me neither to speak nor to write to her, I take this means of making one last appeal to her sense of justice for the sake of what has been. Tell her that to condemn and discard one who has not deserved such treatment without giving her reasons or a chance to explain is contrary to her nature as I believe it to be. Tell her that I have thus, to a certain degree, disobeyed her injunctions in the hope that she may yet be inclined to see justice done. Go and tell her that." The man dropped a $50 into the boy's hand. The boy looked at him for a moment with bright, canny eyes out of a dirty, intelligent face, and then set off at a run. He approached the lady on the bench a little doubtfully, but unembarrassed. He touched the brim of an old plaid bicycle cap perched on the back of his head. The lady looked at him coolly, without prejudice or favor. "Lady," he said, "that gent on the other bench sent you a song and dance by me. If you don't know the guy and he's trying to make the Johnny act, say the word and I'll call a cop in 3 minutes. If you does know him and he's on the square, why, I'll spiel you the bunch of hot air he sent you." The young lady betrayed a faint interest. "A song and dance," she said, with a deliberate, sweet voice that seemed to clothe her words in a diaphanous garment of impalpable irony. "A new idea. In the troubadour line, I suppose. I used to know the gentleman who sent you, so I think it will hardly be necessary to call the police. You may execute your song and dance, but do not sing too loudly. It's a little early yet for open-air vaudeville, and we might attract attention." "Oh," said the boy with a shrug down the length of him, "you know what I mean, lady. Take a turn, it's wind. He told me to tell you he got his cuffs and collars in that grip for a scoop cleaned out the Frisco. Then he's going to shoot snowbirds in the Klondike. He says you told him not to send round no more pink notes nor come hanging on the garden gate, and he takes this means of putting you wise. He says you refereed him out like a has-been and never given no chance to kick at the decision. He says you swiped him and never said why." The slightly awakened interest in the young lady's eyes did not abate. Perhaps it was caused by either the originality or the audacity of the snowbird hunter in thus circumventing her express commands against the ordinary modes of communication. She fixed her eyes on a statue standing disconsolate in the disheveled park and spoke into the transmitter. "Tell the gentleman that I need not repeat to him a description of my ideals. He knows what they have been and what they still are. So far as they touch on this case, absolute loyalty and truth are the ones paramount. Tell him that I have studied my own heart as well as one can, and I know its weakness as well as I do its needs. That is why I decline to hear his pleas, whatever they may be. I did not condemn him through hearsay or doubtful evidence, and that is why I made no charge. But since he persists in hearing what he already well knows, you may convey the matter. Tell him that I entered the conservatory that evening from the rear to cut a rose for my mother. Tell him I saw him and Miss Ashburton beneath the pink oleander. The tableau was pretty, but the pose and juxtaposition were too eloquent and evident to require explanation. I left the conservatory, and at the same time the rose and my ideal. You may carry that song and dance to your impresario. I'm shy on one word, lady. Juxta. Put me wise on that, will you? Juxtaposition, or you may call it propinquity, or if you like, being rather too near for one maintaining the position of an ideal. Gravel spun from beneath the boy's feet. He stood by the other bench. The man's eyes interrogated him hungrily. The boy's were shining with the impersonal zeal of the translator. The lady says that she's onto the fact that gals is dead easy when a fella comes spieling ghost stories and trying to make up, and that's why she won't listen to no soft soap. She says she caught you dead to rights hugging a bunch of calico in the hothouse. She sidestepped in to pull some posies, and you was squeezing the other gal to beat the band. She says it looked cute, all right, but it made her sick. She says you better get busy and make a sneak for the train. The young man gave a low whistle, and his eyes flashed with a sudden thought. His hand flew to the inside pocket of his coat and drew out a handful of letters. Selecting one, he handed it to the boy, following it with a silver dollar from his vest pocket. Give that letter to the lady, he said, and ask her to read it. Tell her that it should explain the situation. Tell her that, if she had mingled a little trust with her conception of the ideal, much heartache might have been avoided. Tell her that loyalty she prizes so much has never wavered. Tell her I am waiting for an answer. The messenger stood before the lady. The gent says he's had the ski bunk put on him without no cause. He says he was no bum guy, and lady, you read that letter, and I'll bet you he's a white sport all right. The young lady unfolded the letter somewhat doubtfully and read it. Dear Dr. Arnold, I want to thank you for your most kind and opportune aid to my daughter last Friday evening when she was overcome by an attack of her old heart trouble in the conservatory at Mrs. Waldron's reception. Had you not been near to catch her as she fell and to render proper attention, we might have lost her. I would be glad if you would call and undertake the treatment of her case. Gratefully yours, Robert Ashburton. The young lady refolded the letter and handed it to the boy. The gent wants an answer, said the messenger. What's the word? The lady's eyes suddenly flashed on him, bright, smiling, and wet. Tell that guy on the other bench, she said, with a happy, tremulous laugh, that his girl wants him.
Beep bappin dip bappin bo 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 bang bo woom dappin boo bop bo bo wop wee wee dappin boo bop.
Hey, here's another O. Henry story for you. This one's called The Defeat of the City. Robert Walmsley's descent upon the city resulted in a Kilkenny struggle. He came out of the fight victor by a fortune and a reputation. On the other hand, he was swallowed up by the city. The city gave him what he demanded and then branded him with its brand. It remodeled, cut, trimmed, and stamped him to the pattern it approves. It opened its social gates to him and shut him in on a close-cropped, formal lawn with a select herd of ruminants. In dress, habits, manners, provincialism, routine, and narrowness, he acquired that charming insolence, that irritating completeness, that sophisticated crassness, that overbalanced poise that makes the Manhattan gentleman so delightfully small in his greatness. In his 20s, Robert Walmsley was a man of the world. He 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 was a man of the world. One of the upstate rural counties pointed with pride to the successful young metropolitan lawyer as a product of its soil. 6 years earlier, the county had removed the wheat straw from between its huckleberry-stained teeth and emitted a derisive and bucolic laugh as old man Walmsley's freckle-faced Bob abandoned the certain 3 per diem meals of the one-horse farm for the discontinuous quick lunch counters of the 3-ring metropolis. At the end of the 6 years, no murder trial, coaching party, automobile accident, or cotillion was complete in which the name of Robert Walmsley did not figure. Tailors waylaid him in the street to get a new wrinkle from the cut of his unwrinkled trousers. Hyphenated fellows in the clubs and members of the oldest subpoenaed families were glad to clap him on the back and allow him 3 letters of his name. But the Matterhorn of Robert Walmsley's success was not scaled until he married Alicia Vanderpool. I cite the Matterhorn for just so high and cool and white and inaccessible was this daughter of the old burghers. The social Alps that ranged about her, over whose bleak passes 1,000 climbers struggled, reached only to her knees. She towered in her own atmosphere, serene, chaste, prideful, wading in no fountains, dining no monkeys, breeding no dogs for bench shows. She was a Vanderpool. Fountains were made to play for her. Monkeys were made for other people's ancestors. Dogs, she understood, were created to be companions of blind persons and objectionable characters who smoked pipes. This was the Matterhorn that Robert Walmsley accomplished. If he found, with a good poet with a game foot and artificially curled hair, that he who ascends to the mountain tops will find the loftiest peaks most wrapped in clouds and snow, he concealed his chilblains beneath a brave and smiling exterior. He was a lucky man and knew it, even though he were imitating the Spartan boy with an ice cream freezer beneath his doublet, frappéing the region of his heart. After a brief wedding tour abroad, the couple returned to create a decided ripple in the calm cistern, so placid and cool and sunless it is, of the best society. They entertained at their red brick mausoleum of ancient greatness in an old square that is the cemetery of crumpled glory. And Robert Walmsley was proud of his wife, although while one of his hands shook his guests, the other held tightly to his alpenstock and thermometer. One day Alicia found a letter written to Robert by his mother. It was an erudite letter, full of crops and motherly love and farm notes. It chronicled the health of the pig and the recent red calf, and asked concerning Robert's in return. It was a letter direct from the soil, straight from home, full of biographies of bees, tales of turnips, paeans of new-laid eggs, neglected parents, and the slump in dried apples. "Why have I not been shown your mother's letters?" asked Alicia. There was always something in her voice that made you think of lorgnettes, of accounts of Tiffany's, of sledges smoothly gliding on the trail from Dawson to 40 Mile, of the tinkling of pendant prisms on your grandmother's chandeliers, of snow lying on a convent roof, of a police sergeant refusing bail. "Your mother," continued Alicia, "invites us to make a visit to the farm. I have never seen a farm. We will go there for a week or two, Robert." "We will," said Robert, with the grand air of an associate Supreme Court justice concurring in an opinion. "I did not lay the invitation before you because I thought you would not care to go. I am much pleased at your decision." "I will write to her myself," answered Alicia, with a faint foreshadowing of enthusiasm. "Felice shall pack my trunks at once. 7, I think, will be enough. I do not suppose that your mother entertains a great deal. Does she give many house parties?" Robert arose, and, as attorney for rural places, filed a demurrer against 6 of the 7 trunks. He endeavored to define, picture, elucidate, set forth, and describe a farm. His own words sounded strange in his ears. He had not realized how thoroughly herbcidized he had become. A week passed, and found them landed at a little country station 5 hours out from the city. A grinning, stentorian, sarcastic youth driving a mule to a spring wagon hailed Robert savagely. "Hello, Mr. Walmsley! Found your way back at last, have you? Sorry I couldn't bring in the automobile for you, but Dad's bull-tugging the 10-acre clove patch with it today. Guess you'll excuse my not wearing a dress suit over to meet you. It ain't 6 o'clock yet, you know." "I'm glad to see you, Tom," said Robert, grasping his brother's hand. "Yes, I've found my way at last. You've a right to say 'at last.' It's been over 2 years since the last time, but it will be oftener after this, my boy." Alicia, cool in the summer heat as an Arctic wraith, white as a Norse snow maiden in her flimsy muslin and fluttering lace parasol, came round the corner of the station, and Tom was stripped of his assurance. He became chiefly eyesight, clothed in blue jeans, and on the homeward drive to the mule alone did he confide in language the inwardness of his thoughts. They drove homeward. The low sun dropped a spendthrift flood of gold upon the fortunate fields of wheat. The cities were far away. The road lay curling around wood and dale and hill like a ribbon lost from the robe of careless summer. The wind followed like a whinnying colt in the track of Phoebus' steeds. By and by, the farmhouse peeped gray out of its faithful grove. They saw the long lane with its convoy of walnut trees running from the road to the house. They smelled the wild rose and the breath of cool, damp willows in the creek's bed. And then in unison all the voices of the soil began a chant addressed to the soul of Robert Walmsley. Out of the tilted aisles of the dim wood they came hollowly. They chirped and buzzed from the parched grass. They trilled from the ripples of the creek ford. They floated up in clear pan's-pipe notes from the dimming meadows. The whippoorwills joined in as they pursued midges in the upper air. Slow-going cowbells struck out a homely accompaniment. And this was what each one said. "You found your way back at last, have you?" The old voices of the soil spoke to him. Leaf and bud and blossom conversed with him in the old vocabulary of his careless youth. The inanimate things, the familiar stones and rails, the gates and furrows and roofs and turns of the road had an eloquence too, and a power in the transformation. The country had smiled, and he had felt the breath of it, and his heart was drawn as if in a moment back to his old love. The city was far away. This rural atavism then seized Robert Walmsley and possessed him. A queer thing he noticed in the connection with it was that Alicia, sitting at his side, suddenly seemed to him a stranger. She did not belong in this recurrent phase. Never before had she seemed so remote, so colorless and high, so intangible and unreal. And yet he had never admired her more than when she sat there by him in that rickety spring wagon, chiming no more with his mood and with her environment in the Matterhorn chimes with a peasant's cabbage garden. That night, when the greetings and the supper were over, the entire family, including Buff, the yellow dog, bestrewed itself upon the front porch. Alicia, not haughty but silent, sat in the shadow, dressed in an exquisite pale gray tea gown. Robert's mother discoursed to her happily concerning marmalade and lumbago. Tom sat on the top step, sisters Millie and Pam on the lowest step to catch the lightning bugs. Mother had a willow rocker. Father sat in the big armchair with one of its arms gone. Buff sprawled in the middle of the porch in everybody's way. The twilight pixies and pucks stole forth unseen and plunged other poignant shafts of memory into the heart of Robert. A rural madness entered his soul. The city was far away. Father sat without his pipe, writhing in his heavy boots, a sacrifice to rigid courtesy. Robert shouted, "No, you don't." He fetched the pipe and lit it. He seized the old gentleman's boots and tore them off. The last one slipped suddenly, and Mr. Robert Walmsley of Washington Square tumbled off the porch backward with Buff on top of him, howling fearfully. Tom laughed sarcastically. Robert tore off his coat and vest and hurled them into the lilac bush. "Come out here, you landlubber," he cried to Tom, "and I'll put grass seed on your back. I think you called me a dude a while ago. Come along and cut your capers." Tom understood the invitation and accepted it with delight. 3 times they wrestled on the grass, side holds even as the giants of the mat, and twice was Tom forced to bite grass at the hands of the distinguished lawyer. Disheveled, panting, each still boasting of his own prowess, they stumbled back to the porch. Milly cast a pert reflection upon the qualities of a city brother. In an instant Robert had secured a horrid katydid in his fingers and bore down upon her. Screaming wildly, she fled up the lane, pursued by the avenging glass of form. A quarter of a mile, and they returned, she full of apology to the victorious dude. The rustic mania possessed him unabatedly. "I could do up a cow pen full of you slow hayseeds," he proclaimed vaingloriously. "Bring on your bulldogs, your hired men, and your log rollers." He turned handsprings on the grass that prodded Tom to an envious sarcasm. And then with a whoop he clattered to the rear and brought back Uncle Ike, a battered colored retainer of the family, with his banjo, and strewed sand on the porch, and danced chicken in the bread tray, and did buck and wing wonders for half an hour longer. Incredibly wild and boisterous things he did. He sang, he told stories that set all but one shrieking, he played the yokel, the humorous clodhopper. He was mad, mad with the revival of the old life in his blood. He became so extravagant that once his mother sought gently to reprove him. Then Alicia moved as though she were about to speak, but she did not. Through it all she sat immovable, a slim white spirit in the dusk that no man might question or read. By and by she asked permission to ascend to her room, saying that she was tired. On her way she passed Robert. He was standing in the door, the figure of vulgar comedy, with ruffled hair, reddened face, and unpardonable confusion of attire. No trace there of the immaculate Robert Walmsley, the courted clubman and ornament of select circles. He was doing a conjuring trick with some household utensils, and the family, now won over to him without exception, was beholding him with worshipful admiration. As Alicia passed in, Robert started suddenly. He had forgotten for a moment that she was present. Without a glance at him, she went on upstairs. After that the fun grew quiet. An hour passed in talk, and then Robert went up himself. She was standing by the window when he entered their room. She was still clothed as when they were on the porch. Outside and crowding against the window was a giant apple tree, full blossomed. Robert sighed and went near the window. He was ready to meet his fate. A confessed vulgarian, he foresaw the verdict of justice in the shape of that still, white-clad form. He knew the rigid lines that Vanderpool would draw. He was a peasant gambolling indecorously in the valley, and the pure, cold, white, unthawed summit of the Matterhorn could not but frown on him. He had been unmasked by his own actions. All the polish, the poise, the form that the city had given him had fallen from him like an ill-fitting mantle at the first breath of a country breeze. Dully he waited the approaching condemnation. "Robert," said the calm, cool voice of his judge, "I thought I married a gentleman." Yes, it was coming. And yet, in the face of it, Robert Walmsley was eagerly regarding a certain branch of the apple tree upon which he used to climb out of that very window. He believed he could do it now. He wondered how many blossoms there were on the tree. 10 millions? But here was someone speaking again. "I thought I married a gentleman," the voice went on, "but Why had she come and was standing so close by his side? But I find that I have married, was this Alicia talking? Something better, a man. Bob, dear, kiss me, won't you? The city was far away.